Hi, good afternoon. This is a talk that I did several years ago on natural history of senses in the science of senses. But that was done at downtown, and obviously we were not recording in those days. That was before COVID. So I thought record this and share this with people who will share the new class that I'm starting sometime in October on animal senses. Which is, but this one was more concentrated on humans. Okay, so let's get started. And this is was we'll start with a so-called natural history of senses. Okay, and so we'll not follow neither in this class neither the Socratic method of questioning and answering or Montessori method. Okay, but you will be subjected to a so-called Microsoft method of death by PowerPoint. Okay, so, and cogito ergo sum, and this was a class on brain on ended with theories of consciousness and memories. But before you think, you must perceive, and perception comes via your senses. So we'll try to address how uh, self, or either starting from the smallest amoeba, which we'll talk about in the next classes, to human being, as to how we relate to the outside world, how receive information primarily through eyes, ears, smell, taste, and touch. And we have learned to enhance our senses, obviously, by technology. And primarily, that goes back to the one of the founding fathers, Ben Franklin, who had invented glasses. So, and and this will, and we were talking a while back. We used to do a classes on great books, and somewhere along the line, the conversation drifted to Marcel Proust, and the uh, statement of the last century, the word of Proust. And there was a book that was written a while back called Marcel Proust was a neuroscientist. And that, you know, as, so we'll talk a little bit about it. Now, I'm not going to try to read French, but this was basically uh, my translation that I shamelessly copied from Google. Bonjour, mademoiselle, monsieur. Historiquement, naturally dans sens. Lecteur de la recherche de temps perdu. Merci, Dr. Google Traduire. So something with Google Translation. Okay, in search of lost time. Now that is a bigger than probably War and Peace, 3,200 pages, 2,000 characters. And someday, when I get really old, I'll read about it when I can't travel. Or so, and he's considered one of the most influential writer of 20th century. And we are all sentient human beings. Means there is a word that comes from Latin. We to feel from means we're conscious basically. So that's just one fancy way of saying it. Okay, and this is the extract from this thing. But due to copyright, I'm not going to play it because I'm hoping that I can share this on YouTube eventually. Babies have a sense of smell at 12 weeks of gestation. And so we learn to smell through experience. And for example, we saw that during COVID, that the simple virus, people lost their sense. And then again, like sometimes, the smell comes rushing back. And so whether it was one of the earliest sense to evolve, because it has a direct link to your brain, and all the other senses go through various sorts of relay and electrical signaling, but this one, smells, has a direct entry to the brain. And just a couple of months ago, Scientific American had an article about dinosaurs as to how they perceived, because they had a relatively small brain. So, and obviously their vision was not that great, and so, and exactly. So that sense of smell may have played a bigger role in even in dinosaurs. So, okay. Now, it was always thought that human beings' sense of smell is very poor compared to dogs, but some experiments were done with grad students crawling on all four rather, sorry, and they were able to smell their way to chocolate. So, and sometimes, we can smell fear, or for example, in Viva Voce exam that you have to take, you can, really, uh, so that it's a different sensation that now the so-called our immune system may have a lot more role. Called the HLA is part of a smell, and it reminds me of the old Steve Martin movie, The Lonely Guy, where he's trying to meet women and borrows a bottle of sweat of Larry Bird, and the woman who's sitting next to the bar says, "Oh, you smell like Larry Bird." So it was a real funny scene. So it's just a smell, and people, the sexual attraction was uh, highly tuned, very subconsciously to uh, people did experiments with sweaty T-shirts. So, I mean, I don't know how they got the funding for that, but so it's all this is, your immune system, your food that you eat, your microbial flora on your skin, that all makes you unique, gives you a unique smell. So this is a kind of a smell is your road to your unconscious. So perhaps we should say that instead of love at first sight, we should say smell at first sight. Okay, moving on. So this is the famous Marcel Proust, and he had a rather unhappy childhood with a rather dominating father, and he had a little small uh, French pastry uh, uh, called so one of those small plump little cakes, a petite madeleine, which looks as though they've been molded uh, in a shell. And so, and on dull day with a, so the quote, they actually, I'll just read the quote one, weary after a dull day with a prospect of depressing morrow, I raised my lips and it with a spoonful of tea and soaked a morsel of cake. No sooner had the warm liquid and crumbs with it touched my palate, a shudder ran through my whole body. I stopped and intent upon extraordinary changes that were taking place. Exquisite pleasure invaded my senses, but detached with no suggestions of origin, and at once the vicissitudes of life became indifferent, disaster innocuous, its brevity illusionary. The new sensation filled me with precious sense, or rather the essence ceased to feel mediocre, accident, and moral. So it just goes on. So it's and I already talked about a book by Jonah Lehrer, who hypothesized that Proust was the original neuroscientist because he talked about consciousness, and the word that became zeitgeist became the stream of consciousness. That was actually considered by William James, and but the Proustian moment has become actually a word that is widely used in terms of memory consciousness research. Okay, so that's enough about that. But unfortunately, Jonathan Lehrer for subsequent work, was accused of plagiarizing. Okay, so I think I should move along. So these are the 6 basic senses, type of thing that we all know about, that sight is every child runs in their first or second grade, perhaps sight, touch, taste, so this is nothing new about it. And then again, now, so we'll just move around just to cover the point. And now again, there is a sixth sense, which is called balance, which has a lot to do with our cerebellum. Now, okay, let me see if I can change this, Okay, I'm going to see if I can move this here. Okay, now in the beginning, Earth was a noisy place, and then very soon after, Earth formed, life developed rather quickly. Stromatolites were rather passive, but then prokaryotes and other cells evolved very quickly. And now again, then so life gradually evolved, and with that we did a whole different class on it. But senses do not work in isolation, and because in other words, the cells, it's called an assembly of cells or network of cells. Even now, it's said that the cells communicate with each other with tubules and vesicles. So they exchange messages. So we're learning a lot more about how the society of cells behave. And when the cells go rogue, okay, when instead of working in team or in the organ where they're supposed to, that's when cancer develops. So a lot of interesting things about cell-to-cell network. So in other words, you are make a aggregate of the cells that are evolved, and eventually it is left to up to our brain to make sense out of all this sensory input that comes rushing in, and there is a sort of Panglossian solution, which means there is a purpose, okay, to life. First of all, is survival, reproduction, okay, and nutrition, okay. So, and so the basic principle of any organism, starting from a bacteria, is to either run away from it or eat it, okay. So this is, this is sort of goal-driven versus stimulus-driven, okay. So one can say that, so this is how the survival mechanism evolved. So, and there are some other new senses that we have discovered, okay, and that is which we will talk about, in the other classes more, the so-called echolocation in bats, infrared vision in snakes, and electrical, eel, and even magnetic. Now here, this is hopefully, this will not violate anybody's copyright, and I see if I can play. This is supposed to be a GIF image, but this is actually bacteria that make a GIF image. So even with magnets, these bacteria are moving in the direction. So this is a nice example. So unfortunately, I had a whole slide for it, from a Dutch laboratory, but because of copyright fears, I'm not going to be able to show it here. Okay. Okay, they're moving basically for food, whichever direction. So those are senses, okay, are in. So this was an older class that I did, so that some of the information is somewhat dated, but still interesting. How sound waves can affect cheese flavor. Now that takes but obviously it came from a respectable Swiss universities, so I suppose we can trust. Our body listens to vibrations, smell of Parkinson's disease. There was a woman who is supposed to be able to smell Parkinson's disease before they actually clinicians can do. Okay, and hallucinations are a lot in vogue due to artificial intelligence and language models, but that's a different type of. So even with the lack of information, brains just creates scenarios, and so this is and again, the perception of pain is different between men and women, and it was said that if men had to have babies, the human society, the human species would have stopped evolving, reproducing a long time ago. Okay, so this is, okay, so this is, and again, and sometimes when you have mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, your sense perception is different. Okay, and let's see, I think, did I cover this? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, sorry, let me go over that. Now, okay, this is basic anatomy 101 that anybody with basic biology would have learned. And these are the areas in brain. As humans, and we are mostly visual because it occupies about 30% of our brain surface, and again, as to whether we see things and interpret it or we make up our things. So there are a lot of theories which we'll talk about when we talk in details about sight and senses of sight. The somatosensory areas, which occupies about 8%, taste and smell are intricately related, and they're in this parietal temporal region. Olfactory is in the front, which is, as I mentioned a little while ago, it's a direct communication from the brain. Okay, we talked about this one already. Now, the history of senses, then, and now, to understand all of this, various scientists have said what happens in animal experiments when a mice or rats, when the front paws perceive vibration, that the neurons in the somatosensory area is activated, similar to that is activated when they hear it. Okay, so this was when you feel the vibration of the phone and hearing it rings ultimately based in the same area codes. Okay, so that's what we talked about, she's exposed to music. Okay, and okay, right, so that was the basis of their theory type of thing. Okay, and this gets, again, beyond this thing, that the cheese wheels were subjected to various types of musics, classical music, hip hop, even to Led Zeppelin. Okay, and so this is, and so this is what we have talked about, earlier a little while ago. Okay, and when we talked about the woman who was able to smell Parkinson, her name, by the way, was Joyce Milne. Okay, all right, so now I think I've got my slides, as to which one I should share, because I'm using only one monitor and presenter view, so you only see part of it. So history of senses, date back to the ancient times, of natural philosophy, of Aristotle, uh, anima, that he talked about. Okay, and and then it was, he thought that, but his idea of vision was totally off the wall, that eyes threw out rays and which were reflected back, so it was kind of a side beam. But on the other hand, during the enlightenment of Islamic culture, in the from the 9th to the 13th century, they were more in tune that that didn't make sense. Actually, the light was reflected and was received in the eyes. So their reasoning was much more scientific than what the great Aristotle said. So various allegories have been provided in art, and then subsequently, and human knowledge is acquired by senses, like, for example, like a vision, memory, and um, so even people such as philosophers in the Enlightenment area, such as John Locke, talked about perception and memory, and even the great Hume talked about knowledge can be obtained from perception. Okay, and later on, okay, so that was the importance of senses was primarily the way which we gather knowledge and information. Okay, and so that was the thinking. But however, some of this thinking change from the industrial era, that various philosophers later on they talked about the noise and dirt of industrialization. And later on, we started putting emphasis on cleanliness and smells. And that's when with the rise of hygiene theory, the Westerners started thinking the others as dirty and smelly. Okay, and that's when the idea of no touch and eating with utensils later on became the norm. Okay, and it got associated with civilization. Okay, so okay, all right. So this is and now again we are rediscovering some of the sciences that we talked about. That we're discovering the so-called touchy feeling, with the rise of the hippie movement, and okay, the so that we are rediscovering touch and feel with the so-called holistic approach, and even in eating, the flavors and other things have coming into existence. So maybe we're going around full circle from relying entirely on senses to avoiding senses, okay, in favor of cleanliness. And perhaps that had a reason for it because it was related with, infectious disease. Okay, and we talked about, the welcome trust image, from a while back. Let's see if I can zoom in on here. Okay, so we talked about the varieties of senses, and I'm sorry, it's hard to read, and we already talked about Aristotle's book earlier. Okay, and now again, when it comes to our vocabulary, it is important to emphasize that vocabulary has two eyes versus, ears. Okay. Okay, and when we talk about perspective of vision as observation is important, type of thing. So vision is considered the queen of senses. When we talk about in medicine, it talked about the doctor says, "Oh, let me take a look at you, see what's going on." On the other hand, when it comes to the court of law, do not believe everything you see, hear. Okay, hearsay. Okay, so which is, so which organic sense is most ungrateful and dispensable. Okay, so that's the great Immanuel Kant talk about the sense of smell. This talks various times about it in his writings. Okay, and now this is, while we talked about that, and so in English we generally greet people as saying, "Well, it's nice to see you." Okay, on the other hand, some different cultures have a different way of meeting. For example, in Finnish culture, what do you hear? Do you hear anything good? Okay, so and so exactly so, and so and our so maybe we may have more than five senses, but the others are being just coming into the vogue. For example, balance and haptic touch and other perception, and even we have each of our cells have electricity as well. Okay, so and hearing is equally important as to see whether when you're flying in a plane, the fluid in your inner canals changes as a lot to do with how you feel at that time. So varieties of proprioception, it is, the sense of balance has been associated with. So that's an extra sense, Now, which of these senses came first? As the touch, the balance, the chemical change, sense of smell, the auditory, the visual. Okay, so that that has always been okay. Let's see. I don't think this is an image type thing, but example. I think this is a bacterium, trying to eat with phagocytosis. So you can just say that the touch, so it extends out that pseudopoda, and to grab. Okay, and again, so when and so for example, the vision, we are so much visual this thing because of myopia, okay, or short-sightedness occurs much more in people who are overusing their vision sense. For example, in the Orthodox Jewish boys or even Koreans, so that's where we are seeing the problem with extreme short sight vision and extreme reading emphasis. So that's, so there are pluses and minuses. And again, and similarly, so we'll talk a lot more about, as to how the kittens which were blinded and had some horrible experiments that were done, type of thing. So, and so this is, the okay. So their vision get messed up by light signals in the early development phase. So that's okay. Again, when Shakespeare talks about, in his sonnets, basically, okay, and so these are some of the quotes from his works. Okay, I am a Jew. A Jew does not have an eyes, have no hands, sharp senses, and passion. So that's a quote from Shiloh type of thing. So this is so the varieties of quote that I was able to accumulate from Shakespeare. The eye of a man that has not heard, the ear of a man that has not seen, hands not been able to taste. So again, so this is from Midsummer Night's Dream. So these are the so senses and Shakespeare have had a long association that he described, the perception of human being with their outside world in great length. Okay, and again, and then he describes in the pleasures of speech on the double tongue in Antony and Cleopatra, the smell of the blood harbors the infection of evil in Macbeth, the sensory intelligence. In Hamlet, he talks about so varieties of drama. So his references to this thing are extensive. Okay, and here are some more examples of it. Smell of blood that we talked about. Okay, and okay, okay, and these are the various sonnets that he talks about. And so this is okay. I will just go to the sonnet 141 that he talks about. Oh, sorry. In faith, I don't love thee with my eyes, but only with for thee in thee a thousand errors. Okay, and in my heart that loves what that they despise, and who is despised of me to date. So you can just read it at your time if you are of literary mind. Okay, and and then again there are varieties of sonnets in search of an author. So so these are under some quotes that I accumulated. Okay, which are more for completeness type of thing. So and now moving on to art, these are now the five senses. These are the famous paintings by Rembrandt. But, so we can just see that these are the five these things. Now I'm individually made individual slides for it. A peddler smelling spectacles. That is the allegory of sight. Three singers. Okay. Allegory of hearing. Unconscious patient, allegory of smell, is awakened by smelling salt. A stone operation, allegory of touch, and allegory of taste. So, okay, let's see now. And this was one that was missing that was found at an estate sale in New Jersey, and now that painting is with Getty. It was offered for $800, and now it's valued at almost close to $1 million. Okay, so these are some of the paintings, and let's see if I can show them in more details. Okay, yeah. So here you can see the smell and glasses that's being sold. Okay, and so stone operation that is being carried out. Okay, okay. So this was so census have figured widely in all sorts of endeavors. Okay, and not to be outdone, another artist, Giuseppe Arcimboldo, and he was at the court of the Austrian Empire, the Habsburg. Okay, so he painted varieties of this thing, census with food items. You can just see how this is sort of a whimsical way of illustrating. Okay, and so it's the facial effect with varieties of food that he was famous for. Okay. Okay, again, more of this thing on art. Uh, Artist named Michel Swivert's boy in turban holding a nosegay, which is a special type of flower. So they're talking about the 5 human senses, varieties of subject in European painting from antiquity to the Middle Ages. And the senses were considered at that time, the religion was involved in as the deceitful and elated with with perception of sin at that time. So various allegorical painting were were depicted in art. Okay, here are some more. Okay, 1645 senses are represented in merry company. Okay, here is embodied by playing musicians at the top. Okay, and taste by the uh, uh, casks of wine, sight by lovers gazing in each other's eyes, smell by the dog in pipe smoke, and touch by the central girl's figure with musical instrument. And so this is a way of senses were represented in artwork at length. Okay, here is another allegory of senses, so uh, okay. Okay, and so this was as let me see. I think what I have for here, 1594. This painting is at the famous Louvre, and pregnancy with Henry IV of France, illegitimate child. There was the origin of words most visual taboo that was presented. So showing breast and touch. So this painting was, so this one the French this thing. So this was considered, somewhat of a risque pointing until until Hugh Hefner broke the taboo in putting it in print. Okay. Now moving on to photography, okay. Let's see if I can read some of the things. The sense of sight represented by piece, this was 1922 at the Museum of Glass. A good example of the sense of sight. The sense of sight is one of the 5 senses and important role, so this is one way of, artistic representation of it. The sense of smell, again, represented, this is a photo collection. Okay, laborer who smells the flower. Okay. Okay, so that's another depiction. Okay, here is the sense of taste, the poor starving children with juxtaposition with a fancy food. Okay. The sense of touch represented by the famous model Giselle Bundchen. I think he was married to Tom. She was married to Tom Brady. Okay. And another artistic example, 19th century. Okay. Fruits, lobster, roses, perfume, musical instrument. Okay. The singing girl. Okay. A parrot and cherry women. Okay. And so this was, African servant, okay, the monkey, pyramid. So this is, varieties of way that he had presented the empire of senses. So you can just see about everything is represented. Hopefully you can see this as a zoom right along type of thing. So, okay, you can see how, the African servant in the corner and various musical instruments, food. Okay. All right. Now we get into the mystery of vision. Okay, this is just, set of white dots doesn't make any sense type of thing as to what that actually means. Okay, but it will become clear in just a second as to see how our brain imagines things. So all we have to do is to draw a circle. Okay, and you can just see, we can recognize face, type thing. So we're all hardwired to this, and and this was, I think was shown by Edward Munch earlier in the screen also. So, okay, and I already showed you type of thing is to see how that Arcimboldo, have representation of the face, look at, you can just see this all sorts of things is basically this is just varieties of vegetables that are posed, but we can just easily imagine that there's a human face represented. Okay. Getting to the example, this is a phenomenon which is some of you obviously living in Florida may be familiar with bioluminescence. It's the ability of living organisms to produce light through chemical reaction. Okay, and it's thousands of marine lives, have this undersea. Okay, especially that is fish, squid, jellyfish in the so-called pelagic zone where the oxygen is available. Okay, and then further down, okay, between 200 to 1,000 meters deep, the organisms are bioluminescent because again, light does not reach that far down. Okay, on land, there are some arthropods. Obviously everybody knows about fireflies and glowworms. Okay, some of the fungi, mushrooms are also bioluminescent. Okay, so there is, nature uses bioluminescence to a wide extent for detecting prey, a warning, and as well as for communications. Okay, so it is, it has evolved dramatically in nature. Okay, and then there is an example of the so-called binocular rivalry. Okay, so so this is, can just see these are the examples. Okay, either this is an old woman with the chin up here and with the nose, or there's a young woman facing away from us with a nice curved neck and a nice pointed nose. So it depends upon how our face can fool. So either two faces or one behind the eye. Okay, and this is a so-called Netter's cube. Okay, the blue face of the cube, front or back. So these are the varieties of optical illusions. So that that have been created in various forms, and we'll talk more about it when we talk about vision. Okay, and again, and the doors of borrowed the word from Aldous Huxley, the doors of perception, the musical group Doors. So he was a fan of Aldous Huxley, and that's where the word was borrowed from, and again dates back to William James. And so the vision again is, we're fortunate to have color vision, and it has evolved. Eyes have evolved many times, in the course of evolution, and we'll talk at length about it as we move right along. Okay, and again, so we can, human eye has, we have depth perception and it's remarkable acuity of the vision with relatively narrow field, and as to hunter versus prey, the position of eye is different as to what's more important for a lion versus that of a rabbit. And again, so this is the tricolor visions, we are able to distinguish a huge varieties of things. But again, your eyes can deceive you, as we'll see in the next. Okay, now again, due to copyright things, I cannot show this, but this was a classical experiment that was done probably, I would say in the 50s, the selective attention demonstration. So the YouTube video, you can find it yourself, but this was an example as to how a bunch of students were asked to count the basketball as to how many times the basketball is passed. Okay, but the real test was totally different, and the examiner did not tell the students that a person dressed in a gorilla suit comes, stands in the middle, waves hand, and none of these people who are focused on counting how many times the ball was passed between the people with the white or the black shirt or what have you. So they were focused on that, so they just totally missed. So the eyes can see only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. And that was the famous philosophical thought processes by Andre Bergson, who went on to get Nobel Prize for Literature in 1927. Okay. Okay, so this is, okay, and now this is another video from Margaret Livingston, and okay, but again, unfortunately, due to copyright, I'm not able to show it to you. Okay, and what can art tell us about human brain? So she is I don't think this gives me the option to open this thing, so sorry about that, but okay. Okay, and this was another example. There is some exceptional people. Evolution does a varieties of things. This is a woman. Okay, I think let's see what was her name. Yeah, Veronica Sider. Okay, let's see. Let's talk about it. I had again a YouTube video for her, but I'm not going to be able to show it. She's a German lady who has a remarkably acute vision, 20 times more powerful, so almost like eagle-eyed human. Okay, and we can detect, huge distances, but she was far more superior. She could detect identity of people from more than a mile away. Okay, so it was just a remarkable evolutionary accident. That's all one can say, basically. So she was unique, and I don't think they've discovered anybody else. I mean, again, we have seen an example of similarly. Okay, now again, different cultures have a different way of looking at it, because in Christianity there is the word, and in Islam also there is the word, basically. While under Hinduism is a vision takes more important. The Hindus go to the temples for darshan of their gods and ringing bells, so auditory, tasting bread, okay, or kissing sacred objects. So all these senses have been heavily involved with religion. Okay, and again, various prophets have had their vision, or starting from Moses onward to Muhammad and Jesus. So whether they had hallucinatory experience or not, that's anybody's guess. Similarly, the varieties of out-of-body experiences have been the sensoria. And during surgery, when the temporal area is stimulated, people wake up with the so-called seeing visions, okay, and associated with their bodies floating over them. So the out-of-body experiences are associated with various parts of the anatomy. Okay, again, okay, faith, science, and senses. So this was the Galileo's thing. So okay, let's see what his quote is. I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended for us to forego their uses by some other means to knowledge. So this was, again, so religion and science, came into conflict. And again, this was we expanded our senses with the discovery of the original Leeuwenhoek microscope. Okay, and so you can just see how the primitive microscope that he had devised, and first time he looked at the uh, scrapings from his teeth and saw organisms. So we were able to expand the senses, and the rest was this science of microbiology that evolved. Okay, and the varieties of way the senses have different names, and various cultures, let's just see, associated with, like earth, water, light, air, and along with the sense organs that are associated, which are very apparent basically in the sensation that comes. So this is how, the whole religion has incorporated your spirit and perception, and it goes to the mind. And this is, from outside in, the information that comes in through varieties of senses lead to our experience of self and consciousness as to how we communicate with the world at large. And in humans, as a rule, are visual creatures, as we talked about. Okay. And on the other hand, there are some other cultures, which the Jahai in Malaya, they rely more on their senses. And some of the hunter-gatherer cultures have a different way of using their ability. Okay. And people, and like Laos, Lao area and Parsis, they are much more, they have a better sense of taste. Okay. And so this has been a big field of research, for different cultures have a different way of looking at it. Okay. And okay, I'm sorry, this is not going to show very well because uh, English people were best at talking about shape. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is cut off type of thing. So, and so yes, exactly. So in West, we don't talk much about smell. That's considered. On the other hand, some of the other cultures, talk more with your hand. Okay. For example, the French gestures, or the Italians. Okay. Now, this is an interesting experiment that was done, I think, in the 50s, basically, that these are two shapes, nothing special about it, the triangles as well as the rounded shape, okay, and how that was identified all over the things. And there were two words that were given, okay, Buba and Kiki. And this was an experiment done by a psychologist named Kohler. Okay. And all over, people consistently more likely to decide that the rounded shape is Buba and the jagged shape spike is Kiki. And this finding hold true for college students, older adults, young children, non-native English speakers. So this was done in Spanish speaking areas. So this was remarkable as to how speech and sound were hardwired evolutionary. So even in people whose original language was not English, Tamil, South Indian language, okay, this accuracy rate was, remarkably prevalent, type thing. So this turned out to be about 88%, so a lot higher than what chance would say. Interestingly, the association between these two words and shape was far less in people with autism. There was only about 55%. So go figure that, how that makes sense. Okay. Okay. And then varieties of a little bit of, about fashions and senses. Okay. And this was, okay, let's see if we can make this bigger. In collaboration, Valentino devised a 5-room installation inside the five senses, with a grand piano placed in a gallery space and butterflies. And so this was, an artistic rendition of senses. Okay, I think I'll have some other pictures. This was the touch room, featured section of art gallery with dozens of arms, okay, that the guest could weave through, okay, on either side with face and from abstract. So this is an artistic presentation of senses. Okay, this was representation of smell, was applied to the walls of another gallery. Okay, keyhole cap, no, so and so this is, gets a little too esoteric for, you can just see how the sense of smell, the cigarette smell, obviously. Okay, and the taste room, featured plates showing section of artist 350 interpretation of woman's face. Okay, all right. A pile of candy for emphasis. So this was in a way sense of taste. Okay. And again, when the philosophers get into okay, which one was this one was sight was illustrated quite literally by a massive artwork against one art gallery. So this is art in senses. But Marcel Ponty, the French philosopher, we know not through our intellect, but through our experience. Maurice Merleau-Ponty is a French philosopher, if I recall correctly. Okay. Okay, and this is again some of the other French philosophers, had their, essays on art and senses rather. This, and let's see, I think, yeah, now I have my notes on this side. Condillac was a French philosopher, psychologist, so he was the opposite of John Locke on the English side. The senses were unlocked, beginning with smell, followed by leads to comparison, and so this is the natural order of things. So that's what he was talking about. Okay, now we'll get into architecture and senses. Okay, and this is, let's see, I think, this was the Japanese monkeys, but I think I can't again show the video. Okay, the exposure of nature, and we know with our brain, as to how. Okay, this is the brain scan that occurs, when after sitting quietly, how the brain is, after a 20-minute walk, the brain it shows a different, fMRI pictures. Right. Okay, so I think we're recording right now continuously, so I'm sorry for the interruption. Okay, now, and this is, very obvious, as to see what scenery you would prefer, type of thing, how architecture is to whether crowded city or secluded one area. So aesthetics and other stuff has a huge importance. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to pause this for a second. Okay, we'll start again with okay, varieties of sensory stimulation is occurs in different parts of the brain. So brain is really very region specific type of thing that takes place, So and the people who were in a space station, again, their biggest complaint was they were missing fresh air type of thing. So again, so we need a texture and variation with our sensory exposure. Okay. And again, we all crave for so-called a multisensory experience. Okay. When you're eating runs in a fancy restaurant versus sandwich on the run, again, even simple things such as color of the plate, okay, crunch of the chips, the sensory experience, combined sensory experience is a lot more important. For example, just eating soft, mushy potatoes versus crunching a potato chip. Okay, so beauty is just in the eyes of perception. So not just so it's a combined cross model exposure with hearing, sight, and again, finally, the brain tries to make sense out of all this information that comes in from different areas. And again, this is a classic hollow mask illusion, as you can see from the front or the back. Okay, and this was again perfume in politics. One of the Israeli person had used this perfume. Fascism perfume has used as for advertisement campaign. And okay, that has something to do with like a right-wing politician. It smells like democracy. Okay, this was her one of the ad campaigns. So, but again, just for side effect as to how politicized even senses can become. This is an interesting example, something called the McGurk effect. Again, I just have a link for the YouTube video type thing. So it's a perceptual phenomenon that shows the interaction between your hearing, vision, and speech. Okay, and it's an auditor visually illusion that occurs. Okay, then when they are not matched. Okay, so when the sounds which are ba and fa. Okay, so and the face moves as if they're saying ga, and it's perceived differently. So this is sorry I can't show this to you, but when you see it, it's just absolutely fools your brain. The illusions create when the vision and hearing contradict, leading to the perception as a totally different sound. Okay, and so this is an example of it that I copied from Wikipedia. But if you have time, just click on this link, and it's a remarkable thing as to even no matter how many times you watch this, okay, you really get fooled with it, and you cannot avoid that. Okay. Now, this is, more example. This was the more research that won the Nobel Prize in the uh, early 21st century. The channels, the potassium ion channels that were discovered for heat and cold, the perception potential cation, the varieties of calcium and potassium channels that are involved. These are the localized for heat sensing and cold sensing ion channels that react to chili and to various cold sensing, which like menthol. Okay, so this was the scientific breakthrough that warranted a nod from the Nobel Prize Committee. Okay, because the localization and fine anatomical and physiological discovery was the okay. All right, from vision to touch, exploring five senses. There is a big seminar that was a talk that listening to music is not only auditory, but a multi-sensory experience with the emotions and other reward system. That's one of the reasons why we all enjoy good music. Okay. Okay. Now, this is really a dramatic example. There is a scientist, astrophysicist or astronomer rather, named Wanda Diaz Merced. She had lost her sight in the early 20s, but still pursued her dream of becoming an astronomer. Okay, and so she is able to convert data into sound, and which she is able to analyze complex data sets. Okay, and this was just mind-boggling as to she's able to determine, the supernovas and the images and the data that is collected into it. So it was just how her brain processes information is just absolutely phenomenal and mind-boggling to me. Okay, all right. Now here we have a concept of interoception, sense of internal sense of body. Okay. Now again, so like it's a subjective sensation is to see how varieties of pathways the body internally communicates. Like for example, just your glucose level, or if your stomach is distended, the information gets transmitted to the other parts, to the brain, and you can just, interpret, varieties of dimensions that are involved in interpreting your internal signal. Okay. And so this is, like varieties of research has been done. Okay, that for example, the information that comes from your heart, from your respiration, from your stomach, from your immune system, that is all processed in a specific so-called insular area of your brain. That's one of the reasons why I can say this is so-called gut instinct. And this has been involved, implicated in people who are the high stack traders and hostage negotiators type of thing. So this is again, so this is how our internal body communicates with our brain. Now this is again deficit in people with autism. Okay, and then again, for example, even just some of these reactions are not in your own control. For example, when you're excited, your pupils become dilated, and when you're sad, your pupils contract, and things. So, okay. And another interesting this thing is something called, this is a rare syndrome called Charles-Bonnet syndrome, and this was, and he could see that, imagined patterns and figures and other stuff that was not there. So this was like a sort of called visual hallucinations. It's a rather rare syndrome, but that, that was one of the, neurological quirks, about the Charles-Bonnet syndrome. Okay. Now, recently, in a recent past, something called the cross-modal research has been a big thing as to how these senses are interconnected. And for example, music will make taste your food taste better. Color of the plate we talked about, and when playing, brass makes, with the bitter sound. So varieties of other things that you would not normally consider, like for example, even colors. There is something called warm colors versus a loud color. Okay, so so this is, how varieties of metaphors and perception relationship have been investigated. Now, we already talked about smell, and which directly goes to the amygdala, the center for emotions, and bypasses the thalamus. And again, so this is again, so-called jelly bean taste. Okay, so when your nose is clipped, you cannot taste. They all just basically taste same. But so a smell has a lot more to do with your this thing. So and as opposed to direct tasting. So which one is more prominent? Okay. And again, this is just to give you a bit, we'll talk more about it, the primary taste. Okay. And the sweet taste at the tip of the tongue, sour is on the side, salty is all over, bitter back of the tongue. And then a Japanese scientist back in the 30s proposed something called the umami taste, which has to do with the savory flavor of cooking meat. And there are some other tastes that have been proposed, but those are not widely accepted. Sweet is that of carbohydrates. Umami is related to protein, sour to vitamin C. Salt, is related with sodium channels. Bitter represents danger and survival. A fat is the fatty acids. Okay. And again, a taste is a primordial, type of thing. Is that this has to do with the survival instinct type thing. Okay. And nociception. Okay, so now here we talk about responding to painful stimulus via spinal cord, and that's the chili powder as to how it just stimulates certain channels directly into the chemical capsaicin. Okay, it's it's related via spinal touch. Okay, and again, people would do some stupid things just for attention. I had a video about this guy, who for YouTube, immerse himself in 1,200 baths of hot sauce, and obviously it got into his mucous membranes, including his bottom, It was extremely painful experience and managed to survive. So it just shows how the skin receptors, can set you on fire, so to speak. So, okay. And last but not the least, we'll talk about animal senses. And for this, I have the whole class, so I'm not going to dwell too much into it. Dogs and sharks, bats, butterflies, and so we'll be doing a whole class on it. So, okay, but I think just for completeness, I had included that. Okay, and then again, we talked about interception. So I think I'm not going to get too much into it because I have a whole class coming up in short time. Hearing range is different over different animals, and the infrasonic perception of elephants, ultrasonic of bats. Okay, again, electroception, of eels, shark, and platypus, and we'll talk at more length about it. Interestingly, now this is, a part that's interesting to know that even humans can train themselves for echolocation. And a person who was blind had managed to, with the clicks, and Daniel Kish flashes of sound. So he's kind of one can say it's a living human Batman echolocation. So it clicks sounds, and his ears are able to perceive the sounds that comes back reflected from objects, that type of thing. So okay, so that was something remarkable as to how senses can be morphed again in a different manner. Okay, it's all in the touch, pain, pressure, temp. Okay, the caress of a mother to a child, bump on an elbow, mechanical, stub toes. Okay, peppercorn, mouth numbing influence. So so the touch is equally important, type thing. So, and this was a study that would not be done nowadays. Okay, Wisconsin psychologists had done a study of monkeys who were separated from their mother, and they even rejected food in favor of hugging a cloth, uh, soft object in the shape of a female monkey. Okay, so there were some horrible experiments that were done by this psychologist named Harry Harlow. Similarly, the example that was done was in Romania, a lot of these orphan children were left isolated, and they were deprived of human touch. And as they grew up, okay, and they had difficulty with speech and relating with people, and lots of developmental and psychological problems. Some of the kids have been adopted in US, and again, they've shared their experiences as adults as to how horrid the experience was growing up without any exposure. And again, how the touch and how this is again a kid's experiment as to how perception can fool. When you put your finger in cold water, cold receptors get depolarized quickly, then they adapt to a steady state level. Okay, and then again, when you change again to normal water, so how your perception changes between hot and cold, between the thermoreceptors, so that's an experiment, it's like from hot, when you go to normal, it feels cold, and then when you go from cold to normal, it feels hot. So how your perception, so again, the absolute condition is different, but how your previous experience forms your present feeling as to whether you would feel the water as hot and cold. So that's a very way as to how we make sense out of the outside world. And again, this is the dress that became very popular in 2015. It's the blue and gold, trust your eyes. And as to how the internet just went berserk as to how this was, whether people was blue and black versus gold and okay type thing. So this was just the controversy went on and on as to what was the correct this thing. So so half the people's this is blue and gold, and somebody else thought it a different color, and that had to do with the background in which the photograph was taken. Okay, and so that was was interesting human this thing. So okay, and then there's another this thing that's of interest is called something called the Stroop effect that was proposed again in 1930s as to how the perception confused, because for example, how you name these colors, how you're reading this out, when it's different with different ink, the brain has a conflict, so delay between congruent and incongruent stimuli as to how we read that out. Because when letter red is written, when the word red is written with red ink, it's a lot easier to read rather than reading the second line, is to see how your brain is trying to make sense out of how it's written. Okay, and so this is how what parts of the brains are localized in terms of interpreting these type of stimuli that is coming from outside. Okay. Okay. Now, Jasper Jones, he was attracted to image that was seen but looked at, seen and not looked at and not examined. So object copies on a large canvas in which added bright splashes of different colors with different accents to resemble abstract artists. The outlines of the the colors of the state don't represent. So this is, when you look at closely, that is the map of the United States. American painting on the map. So, but again, when you look at it, that would be a hard way to make a sense out of. So mass-produced effect of stencil. So, so again, this was a brushwork, resembles an abstract artist. Okay, outlines of the state. The colors don't respect the borders. So the blurring of the boundaries, type thing. So this is when I tell you, then you'll probably realize, oh yeah, that does look like good old USA. Okay. So now again, the balancing system, we talked about the vestibular system, when, as long as it works, that's not a problem. But when it goes awry, for example, when you're flying on plane and get sick, that's when you realize that how essential that is. Okay. And in science, there is something called okay, a vestibulo-ocular reflex. That's how it's tested with warm and cold water as to how the eyes would change. Normally, so it's called nystagmus, means your eyes move in the direction. Cold is opposite, warm is same. Okay, that's the mnemonics, how the cold is same side, warm is cold. I'm sorry, cold is opposite, and so which side is stimulated. That's one of the ways of assessing your neurological status, and one of the clinical tests that is done. Again, so I'm not going to show this the video because of the copyright. Okay, and how this shows the example as to how figure skaters, when they're doing the pirouette, as to how why they don't get dizzy, because they keep their eyes, when they're feeling super fast, they go in a wide arc and practice and keep their eye focused on one particular location to avoid getting dizzy. Type thing is to work. So one leg in the middle of the stage, they're looking at the floor, their eyes are fixed, so this does not allow the motion of the fluid to build up. Okay. And so, and this is again a very common problem with your balance system, so the proprioception and your circulatory canals in your ear are very important, because it's a very common reason for okay. And this was again related to, it was very important in the human space program. Okay. And again, this is like, the extrasensory perception, like sensory deprivation. This was a news item from an Orlando reporter into the isolation chamber where she locked herself in, and how the brain plays your trick. And there was a movie that was made. Okay. Okay, but called Altered State, and starring William Hurt and Blair Brown, as to how this man gets into the isolation sensory deprivation chamber and how he regresses almost to the primitive stage, and his whole personality just decomposes. So sensory, the point is that the sensory. Okay, then last but not the least is we'll talk about synesthesia. Okay. Okay, now synesthesia is a science, okay, as to how the brain's sensations can get overlapped, neurologists and researchers have identified as many different types of synesthesia that people can see numbers in colors, how they can see that the number 2 is different to them, okay, in a different color. Okay, and various savants have been associated with this as to how they can see music as colors. Okay, and okay, so it's a two-term. Sin means joint, aesthesia means perception. So any of these fives can jumble up and create so colored letters. Numbers are much more common. This is not a new discovery. It's been around for 300 plus years. It's relatively rare. It can 1 out of 25,000. As we mentioned, a lot of them are savants. Okay, like the red man. It's related to it can be it's a color letter painting. So much more common in artists, painters, and poets. People like Itzhak Perlman, Van Gogh, Stevie Wonder, Korsakov, Marilyn Monroe. So a lot of people had this type of synesthesia sensation. So it was not something that you can acquire, but it is there. Okay. Okay. Then Daniel Tamant, he was one of the functioning savant. Okay, I read a book by him long time back in the 90s, Born on a Blue Day, because he imagined the days and testing as color, and he was a functioning. He was a child born in so-called with epilepsy, and had difficulty relating. It was turned out to have autism later on, but was smart, and he took the test for prodigious memory, and he was able to recite pi up to like 1 million digits, and took him about 2 or 3 months to memorize it, and was absolutely uh, perfect in reciting. It was checked by, at when the test was given at Oxford. Okay, and then I think he was able to learn Finnish, which is I'm sorry, Icelandic, I think, in 2 or 3 months, and which is a difficult language to learn from what I hear, and was able to give an interview in Icelandic, on their TV channel. Okay, and he has been coming up to San Diego, where a neuroscientist named Ramachandran has done studies on him. Okay, so sense is, of self is, really important, so to speak. Sense of self as to it boils down to the metaphysical question as to who am I. Okay, and so this is, a sense of self, whether it's an illusion or not. And the Buddhists have done a lot of thinking about as to how whether your sense of ownership as to who am I and agency is related, and how we perceive as to all the senses are an illusion, basically. So that's one of the dogma or a big thinking on in the Buddhist philosophy. Okay, and again, this is just an interesting this thing as to the so-called rubber hand illusion, which is a classic as to how when the rubber hand is placed and there's a partition in between, and we're stabbed the rubber hand, and again, you would just, even though you so you would just quickly withdraw, thinking that it's part of your own body, type of thing, obviously. So vision and touch maintain a big relationship. Okay, and again, that falls apart when there is surgery done for epilepsy on corpus callosum, which is the joint between the left and right side of the brain. And again, so then there's so-called alien hand syndrome type of thing that takes place. Okay. Okay. And so I think we're coming to the end of this thing. This is a virtual reality experience in our body as to how the VR glasses change. Again, I'm not going to show this video because of the copyright fear that I have. But again, as to how how you can just get totally fooled with the VR glasses. Okay. I'm sorry, let's just move on forward. And a musicophilia, the classic, Dr. Oliver Sacks did a lot of talk on music and perception. And then again, there is a huge role of neuroplasticity that takes place. And there is a David Eagleman, who is a scientist who discovered a device called the hearing vest, okay, which is the electrical signals on the back that people wears in, and with that they are able to perceive and rewire their brain and develop so-called neuroplasticity, and so they gradually train their body with headsets, and they were able to, their skin is able to receive enough particular signal that their brain is able to interpret the sounds. So, and I think they're marketing it almost. Okay. And now there are varieties of research that is done is so-called haptic touch, and the varieties of artificial skin that is develops a touch and reflexes. Okay, so that's the new science of bioengineering that is taking place. This is the example of the hearing vest, by the way, that we talked about a little while ago. Okay, and touch sensors can detect minuscule forces that come around with flexible, so-called electrical neurons that are flexible. Okay, and so it's a biological material that's being developed now. And this is something called the entire haptic science, which is a collaboration of touch, perception, and action that is being researched in the various bioengineering departments. Okay, and you can see that the artificial hand, this thing is coming to a dramatic, much more realistic than the old-fashioned uh, metal prosthesis that was developed. Okay, and I think so. They're beyond five senses, So we're able to hear pictures with a device called BrainPort that was discovered, and then again echolocation that is being developed, digital lollipops, a taste, and a group, Neuralink is doing the brain-computer interfaces. Okay, and last but not the least, okay, I'm sorry, last but not the least, okay, so this is how, sexes and varieties of neurochannel are involved, as you can see, detecting sexual touch. This is so-called piezoelectric neuron channel receptors that are in your nerve endings that allow you to feel pleasure. It occurs primarily in the more sensitive body areas, like your lips and your penis and vagina. Okay, and so these are the varieties of touch which comes that are involved in sex: the affectionate touch, the sensual touch, erotic, and intercourse. So again, so this is how the interpretation. These are the called piezo has to do pressure changes. So mechanosensory principles. So how pressure is transmitted, the physical force changes the ion channel. You can see how the channel is closed and open, and the impulse travels from your skin to the spinal cord. So science is fascinating. And so this gives us an idea about the varieties of involvement of senses. And I think we have recorded about 1.5 hours. I will stop recording, and I will go into it in more details